compromised from a privacy perspective. I want to sensitize you to these. Then we're going to talk about all the solutions and how you can actually achieve a very positive sum, not a zero-sum outcome. And I'll explain what I mean by those terms. So it's all about, hopefully by the end of my talk, I will have you agreeing with me that you need to banish zero-sum from our thinking and embed privacy by design. So let's start. There are a number of different areas of wearable devices. There's wearable computing, of course, things you're familiar with, Google Glass, Apple Watch. Most people are going to wear the miniband. It's amazing. Dr. Carl Martin has developed this band which picks up your EKG, your electrocardiogram, and it is the best biometric you can actually use if you want to replace your password, you want to replace something. It's amazing. So it's a Google Mini. It's just an amazing product. And then, of course, is the quantified self. Fitbit. Different ways of tracking our health, our fitness, recording our lifestyle habits. Yeah, I'm always baffled by things like the Fitbit. I just think I don't know how much you walk, but I know that people love it because it enables them to engage themselves in a kind of discipline that appears to be lacking otherwise, which is great. The problem is this, and I just got this quote yesterday. As mobile and health and fitness apps and wearables gain popularity, privacy experts have raised concerns that companies are monetizing personal medical information. There are thousands of health and fitness device apps on the market, but it's not always clear if the user's data is kept confidential. In fact, I would probably guarantee that in the majority of cases, the user's data is not being kept confidential. And the restrictions in terms of unauthorized third party having access to your data without your knowledge and consent, I would guess that's probably the norm. But we'll talk about some of the problems associated with that. Let me just walk you through some of the privacy risks associated with these apps. And a big part of it is the third-party monitoring. We call this unauthorized third-party access to your data, in which they can potentially track your data, use it for a variety of purposes that were certainly never intended or explored with you. That is a prevailing concern. And also, because of the nature of these apps, obtaining the consent of the individual involved is going to be very difficult to do. In terms of asking them to search for the opt-out box that would tell you that they don't want you to use this information for additional secondary uses. I mean, the reality is everyone is busy. Everyone has these tiny devices. No one is searching through heavy legalese privacy policies, terms of service. We know you're not doing that, nor should you be expected to do that in order to preserve your privacy. Ideally, privacy should be embedded as the default setting. We'll talk a lot about that. I think one of the concerns with the privacy people I've been speaking to is that they feel that with these apps or these devices, any one instance of a device collecting a certain amount of data is considered not to be a big deal because it's a single instance in and of itself, how revealed is that going to be? The reality is that that's probably true. It's just one limited, isolated measure. But when you put this together with a variety of other measures, you are going to have a very detailed portrayal of an individual's life that is very revealing. And it's going to be done completely without your knowledge, your consent, your awareness. These are some of the concerns that are arising. Let's talk for a minute about the Internet of Things. This fits beautifully into that area, of course. In Europe, there's the EU Article 29 Working Party. All you need to know is that this group in the European Union addresses telecommunications-related issues, new technological developments. They're dealing with apps and Internet of Things and wireless devices. What they they are leading with is make privacy the default setting, follow privacy by design. I'm going to talk to you about privacy by design in just a few moments at break, because I really want you to know that this is eminently doable. Privacy by design is something I developed many, many years ago. It has been an international standard in 2010, and it's been translated to 37 languages since then. It has a real global presence. And the essence of it is that you proactively embed the necessary privacy protective measures into the design, into the data architecture, right from the outset. It will enable you to have a win-win proposition instead of a lose. We'll get back to that. Respecting a user's self-determination for their own data is very, very important. The Germans developed many years ago a term called informational self-determination. That it should be the individual who determines the fate of his or her personal information. And that notion is extremely important in Germany and in the EU. It's the notion that it is only the individual who truly knows the context in which the data may be used, or the implications of the data. It's only the individual who can make the proper determinations related to its use. And context is extremely important, and I always like to give myself as an example, and I've spoken very publicly about this in the past. Of course, health information is the most sensitive type of personal information that exists. You would never, ever suggest to anyone that they should disclose their personal information relating to their health care. About 10 years ago, just over 10 years ago, we had a wonderful law in Ontario that was introduced called Keynote, the Personal Health Information Protection Act. I'm going to end with that, just tell you a little bit about it. But it was being introduced just over 10 years ago. I was doing what I always do. I was doing my rounds, going and talking to hospitals and healthcare providers, trying to point out the benefits of this amazing statute. And I usually have a very receptive, positive response to my talks. And I was noticing after the second or third one, I wasn't getting that with a warm, fuzzy feeling. It was something, it was a problem. I didn't know what the problem was, but I had to find out, because here it was very law. Why weren't healthcare providers receptive to my messaging about the law? So I think my third talk I said, I just stopped. And I said, okay, I need you to tell me, what am I doing wrong? I know I'm not getting through you. And I really want to know what the problem is so I can fix it. Because this is a very, very important statute. I need to understand this. And this lovely young doctor stood up and very bravely said, look, you're probably a good privacy commissioner, but you don't know what it means to be a patient. You don't know what it means to be in a hospital having an emergency. And I got it. They thought I was advancing privacy interests above the delivery of healthcare services. He thought I didn't know what it meant to be a patient, and that view was widely shared. And so they thought in a zero-sum way, I was saying privacy trumps healthcare. Nothing could be further from the truth. So I decided that the best thing I could do, and that's what I did, was share my medical history. And I said, the poor guy, I gave him a hard time to be able to, I thanked him profusely afterwards. I said, are you kidding me? I said, I probably had more surgery than you have. I had a lot of neurosurgery, 4 or 5 operations over the years. I've been in and out of emergency. I know what it's like to show up at an emergency and my head is exploding, and even I am not thinking about privacy. Does that satisfy you? And the poor guy was right there. I said, thank you so much for sharing that with me, because I need you to understand I know what it means to be a patient. Nothing is more important than having your healthcare needs addressed, first and foremost. But if I could show you a way that we could weave a code of privacy throughout the entire process, and you could have healthcare services and privacy, wouldn't you prefer that? And he said, absolutely. As long as privacy doesn't trump the other. I said, absolutely not. So then it changed the dialogue. All of a sudden, we had this wonderful, engaging dialogue. And the doctors and healthcare professionals understood I knew that to be patient, so they weren't worried about my interests. I give that to you as an example because no one else could have made that decision other than me. The context is critical, and unique to my situation. about use of the data is also critical. How will these apps make use of the data? Who is it being shared with? Is it being shared with third parties? Through my consent or just in an unauthorized way? In the world of privacy protection, personal information is collected for the primary purpose. There's a primary use for the data. And that's the use that is identified to the patient or the data subject. Once you completed using the data for that purpose, theoretically, everything stops. And if you want to use it for additional secondary uses, you're supposed to go back to the data subject and get consent. It doesn't happen very often, certainly not in the app world. And that's what I'm trying to get across, is that the privacy people do not object in any way to these developments. In fact, I would love if there was some kind of app that would tell me the pump in my head, which flows through the sonic fluid down the shunt when it's plugging up, and it can be fixed early as opposed to needing to want to get additional surgery. I would love that. So I'm all for this, I'm all for health research, but you have to factor in the individual's wishes. And that's the part of the equation that is often missing. Also, if you're going to continue to retain that data and you want to use it for valuable additional purposes like research, etc., you should de-identify that data. Meaning you should remove the personal identifiers using very strong de-identification protocols combined with a risk of re-identification framework that really minimizes the identifiability of the data. Then you can use the data for research purposes. So these are all some of the considerations that should be taken into account. Last year in the fall, so I should let me set the stage. Once a year, there's an International Privacy Commissioners and Data Protection Authorities conference, usually in Europe. Sometimes it's in different places. It was in Mauritius last year. And they issued this declaration on the Internet of Things. And they were concerned about the connectivity, the ubiquitous nature of the connectivity. And they were worried about transparency, how important it was. And they also said protection of the data has to begin from the moment the data is collected. And then they said, I love this because it resonates. Because they said privacy by design should be the key selling point of innovative technologies. And the reason I love that is because if you factor in privacy into your innovative technologies and apps and devices, you can have the best of both worlds. You can have privacy and the deliverables that that app is intended to deliver. So it's a true win-win proposition. And you're going to see more and more of this coming out from the privacy community because people are very concerned about the Internet of Things, big data, data analytics, but there are ways to address these concerns. So I want you to know that my messaging to you is a very positive one, provided that you factor in these measures from the outset. In the United States, the Federal Trade Commission has also expressed considerable concern about apps, health apps. And they have this paper that they released about the Apple Watch and HealthKit platform. They were very concerned about it. Apple responded appropriately, but they were worried because they said that the data stored in the mobile health devices weren't covered by HIPAA, and therefore they were very concerned. And they found that 12 of the health and fitness apps, the app developers were sharing user information with 76 different parties. I mean, that's astounding. 76 different parties. When I'm talking about unauthorized third parties, multiply that by 76. And do we want to guess how many of them have, positive consent of the patient? I would hazard a guess of 0. So they're sounding the alarms in the U.S. for the app developers, the mobile health apps, because they're very concerned with these issues, unauthorized uses of the data, third parties unknown to the patients, to the data subjects, and where are the safeguards to protect personal information. They're largely lacking, and that's what I want to address today. And when you hear about these great developments, I want you to just factor in, is there any privacy measure here that has been addressed? What the FTC chairwoman, Edith Ramirez, proposed was the data security, obviously essential, as well as the uses of the data. Security by design, which is an aspect of privacy by design, that lead the way, that you weave in the necessary protections by design into the devices right from the outset. Data minimization is absolutely critical. It says that if you don't collect and retain the data in personally identifiable form, then you're golden because you have that data minimization. The data do not reside in that manner that is personally identifiable. And the privacy harms arise from personally identifiable data. If you remove the personal identifiers, there is no risk to identifying the individual, provided that you use strong de-identification protocols. They also emphasize the importance of notice of choice for any additional uses that hadn't been contemplated at the time of data collection. So you'll see more and more of these different kind of proposals as you did from Mauritius, from the EU, and from the FTC. So I think bottom line, I want this to be the takeaway. If you understand the initial need and essential need to embed privacy into these apps and get this messaging across to the developers. I would love to talk to developers and show them ways in which they can do this. Because it's not doable. You know, it drives me crazy because they don't, privacy stifles innovation. Are you kidding me? Privacy breeds innovation. Because you got to be really smart and creative to build both privacy and functionality. And I can show you lots of ways in which you can do this. And there are many reasons why you should be doing this. Because if you don't do this, it's going to come back to bite you. There's a lot of very sensitive information that is going to, what I've been describing, unauthorized third parties who are not sensitized to the appropriate handling of the data. And this gentleman says this makes for the perfect storm of privacy exposure. And there's going to be such a pushback when this happens. So I mentioned the FTC in the States. They regularly issue fines in millions, 20 million, 22 million, against people who have breaches of privacy. Here in Canada, this is in the context of Bell, but the Federal Privacy Commissioner, Dan Tavia, about 2 weeks ago, issued a ruling against Bell Canada. Bell Canada was using subscriber data, so I'm a Bell customer, so I paid for that service yearly, and they're using my data, giving to advertisers to send me targeted ads, and they are being paid by the advertisers as well. They're being paid by me, and they don't have my consent to have that stuff sent to me. So the Federal Privacy Commissioner said to them, you've got to offer positive consent. The default, which means what happens if you do nothing else? What is there automatically? The default says it has to be pro-privacy. It has to be, you can't use the data unless the person says gives positive consent for you to use their data. We know from the academic literature that whatever the default setting is, whatever the default condition is, that condition will prevail 80% of the time. I don't have to be privacy. And so is the public. Let me just point you to some research. Now, I should mention Mr. Edward Snowden. He made my life much easier because I no longer have to make the case to businesses when I go speak to them about the importance of privacy and why the benefits are there for them in terms of a business perspective. They now come to me and ask me how to do it. Because what Mr. Snowden revealed was a massive amount of unauthorized data collection that the state is engaged in, and the private sector is also involved in. And the repercussions have been dramatic. The growth of that kind of widespread surveillance, 91% of people in the States feel that they've lost control over their personal information. And they're also concerned about social network accessing it, and that 80% of adults agree that Americans should be very concerned about government surveillance. This this kind of polling, that is unprecedented, that it was such a low percentage. And there are many other things, but 81% felt that with social media, they were very concerned about sharing of private information. We could go on and on. But I also want to give you Canadian examples. The Federal Privacy Commissioner just released this a few months ago. Again, 90% of Canadians said that they were concerned about their privacy. So this is certainly not unique to the United States. Everyone is very concerned these days. It relates to the use of their credit and debit cards. It relates to the use of genetic testing for non-medical purposes. And also, and this made me very sad, 60% have little expectation of privacy because there's so many ways it can be compromised. We can change that, ladies and gentlemen. This can turn on a dime. The institute that I work with now at Ryerson, first one ever, it's called the Privacy Big Data Institute. It is the only big data institute in the world that has granted itself with privacy. You know, I do a lot of public speaking. I was in the UK, in London in the fall, speaking to an engineering group, the IEEE conference, they asked me to do the keynote. And the head of the Big Data Institute from University College London, and he was my talk and met with me afterwards. And he said, how are you going to do the privacy thing? We would love to work with you. Let's collaborate. It's not that we don't value privacy. We just haven't turned our minds to how would you get into the process. Because you see, people are thinking, big data is here, it's going to grow, it's going to proliferate, privacy set aside. That's classic zero-sum thinking. That's what I want you to reject. It is a win-lose proposition that will get you nowhere. And we can substitute positive sum, meaning two positive increments. Zero sum basically means you're going to have an increase in one interest, always to the detriment of another, such that the two total to a sum of zero. I don't believe in zeros. I like positive increments, and that's what we can do. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to now start at the beginning, and I'm going to do a really short Cole's notes on what is privacy, because there appears to be a lot of confusion about what privacy is. In my mind, it's very clear. Here's what it's not. Privacy does not equal secrecy. It's not about having something to hide. It's kind of crazy when people say, wow, you have nothing to hide, but nothing to fear. Yeah, maybe if you live in a socialist state, or a totalitarian state, last time I looked, in a free and democratic society, you are free to do whatever you want without having to reveal anything to the state, unless you've broken the law, you haven't paid your taxes, things of that nature. Apart from those instances, you are free, which means you do not have to share anything that you don't want to, that you are not required by law to do. And that's what freedom is. So privacy is not about secrecy. It's about control. It's all about personal control and the individual exercising their contextual framework in exercising a choice. So I talk about how critical user control is, because the user should be the one to freely exercise freedom of choice and make a decision as to whether they want to reveal something. And as I mentioned, context is key. No one else can make the kind of decision I told you about with respect to my medical data, other than myself. And that applies to all of you. You all have conditions and situations which you may or may not want to share the information. It's your decision to make. You know the context, you know the sensitivity of the data as it applies to you. You should be the only one to make that decision. I've already talked about the Germans and informational self-determination. It was such an important value that in 1983 they enshrined it as a right in our Constitution. And it prevails. Germany is the leading privacy and data protection country in the world. And I always like to point out that it is an accident that they had to endure the abuses of the Third Reich and the complete cessation of all of their freedoms, which they will tell you started with the removal of their privacy. I've been to many conferences in Germany, amazing place, and every conference they lead with a reference to that time and a reference with respect to their privacy, never again. And so I just always like to give this context. Privacy is under control. Now, let me tell you a little bit about privacy by design. I mentioned, we have an international conference once a year, privacy commissioners and data protection authorities, usually in Europe. In 2010, it was in Jerusalem. And at the end of the 3 days, we have a closed session where the commissioners vote on various declarations and resolutions that are put forward. And I put forward a resolution on privacy by design that year because it was getting to the point where I'm going to use an iceberg analogy. We as commissioners are only seeing the tip of the iceberg. With the massive amount of ubiquitous computing, social media, interconnectivity, devices beginning to proliferate, we just didn't have a handle on the majority of the harms that were taking place. They were escaping our knowledge, our ability to challenge them, to regulate. They were largely unknown. And I was delighted that the resolution was unanimously passed, and I was surprised because most commissioners are lawyers and very into a regulatory structure of compliance. But we all saw the writing on the wall. And again, this isn't to the exclusion of regulatory compliance, which offers a system of redress after the fact, after the harm has taken place. This is more like a preventative model, think of medical models, that seek to prevent the medical harms from arising. That's what I want to do with privacy. And fortunately, my colleagues shared that view. And as I said, since then, it's been translated into 37 languages. Virtually any major language appears there, giving it a real global presence. But I would like to ask audiences, if you happen to know the language that isn't on there, and you're familiar with it, come talk to me afterwards. I would love to expand this even further. And that's how we got these languages. I just asked colleagues in various jurisdictions to be very committed and forthcoming. And I would like to say, not a week would go by where I wouldn't hear from someone in one of these jurisdictions telling me about how they were using privacy by design and how it was helping them address the privacy harms in their jurisdiction. And it was just very, very gratifying. So you can do this in a win-win manner. Oh, yeah, so here it is. That's the tip of the iceberg. I was telling to you earlier that unfortunately, we as commissioners, it's not that we were doing our jobs poorly, not at all. My colleagues are amazing, work very hard with limited resources, but the base of the iceberg was growing bigger and bigger and escaping our detection. And now that we complement it with privacy by design, I'm hoping that that equation is changing. And what I want to do is make sure that these changes are introduced in the app world, especially health apps, mobile apps. Very, very important. Here's one of the essentials. I've been alluding to it a lot. I'll walk you through the principles of privacy by design in a moment. But the bottom line is be proactive, prevent the harm from arising, but always preserving the intent of whatever the technology is, whatever the app is intended to deliver. I don't want to prevent mobile health apps from proliferating. I want them to succeed big time. And they'll succeed even more if you embed privacy into the equation. Because then you're not going to have lawsuits, class action lawsuits filed when you have a privacy harm. And I guarantee you, if you don't embed privacy into the design of your systems and your apps, you will have a privacy infraction, a data breach, something will come back. And then you will have to wrestle with the regulators and now the public. Increasingly, it's not lawsuits, it's class action lawsuits that are being filed. I talked to you about the Bell decision a few moments ago. There's now a class action lawsuit against Bell Canada, $750 million. You can avoid that. Build it in up front. Let me walk you through very quickly the 7 foundational principles of privacy by design. And they're called foundational because they form the basis of what you do. And then from it, you can do it in 100 different ways in terms of the exact measures that you introduce. I've talked a lot about being proactive. Privacy is the default setting. It's absolutely critical and perhaps the most difficult. Because what that requires you to do is embed privacy so that it is automatically delivered in your program, in your app, in your system. Someone doesn't have to ask for it. They're providing privacy assurance right from the outset. People love it and use it as a selling feature because I assure you, the public their loyalty and their repeat business. Embedded in design, we talked a lot about full functionality. Let me talk about security for a moment. The term privacy assumes a much broader set of protections than security alone. If you don't have strong security end-to-end, you don't have a chance of having good privacy. So make sure you've got full lifecycle protection from time of data collection through use to secure destruction. Keep it open. You've got to be transparent with the data subject, the patient, the consumer, whoever it is. Remember, it's their information. It's not your information. You may have custody and control over their data, but with that comes a very strong duty of care. So let's get this straight. You act as the custodian of the data. It's not your data. You have to be open with the customers. You have to have respect for users. And when you keep the user at the center of what you're doing, it makes all of this flow much more easily. And just so you know, a few years ago, we operationalized privacy by design into 9 areas. We wanted to show people this isn't just an academic construct or theoretical formulation. It's real, it's on the ground, it works beautifully. And we partnered with all the major companies to produce these papers, with Microsoft, with Intel, with Oracle, with IBM. I could go on and on, giving out many important companies. But we chose to partner with the large companies to show the world that this is eminently doable, and we do it again and again. Just in case some of you are saying, oh, it's going to cost so much to do that. Let me assure you, there is some cost involved if you're doing it proactively. It is a fraction of the cost you have to involve if you have a privacy infraction. As I mentioned, it's no longer just lawsuits, they're class action lawsuits. But the damage to your brand and the damage to your reputation may be irrevocable. Look at Target. Target has pulled out of Target Canada, gone. I could go on and on about Target. Excuse me. They had, in the last quarter of 2013, this massive data breach. The CEO of Target in the United States resigned early 2014. The president of Target Canada was fired shortly after that. In the fourth quarter of 2014, their sales had diminished by 46% compared to the same quarter the year before. You can't sustain those kind of losses. Watch out for privacy, build it in, it'll come back to be a benefit, an enormous benefit. Here's just one example. Tic Tac in Japan, I mentioned that I always hear from companies. The Japanese were very quick to embrace privacy by design. The Japanese Information Processing Development Center kindly let me know last year how widely it is used and how much they respect it. But I've talked to the people, it gives them value. If there's no value in it, they're not going to keep doing it. It will also give you value. And we did 2 papers with Oracle on privacy and security by design. Very, very important to have both, absolutely critical. Now, I was going to talk to you about PHEPA, which is Ontario's Personal Health Information Protection Act. I believe I'm supposed to stop right here. So I'm going to stop now. I'm unfortunately not going to tell you about PHEPA. I'm just going to go to my concluding remarks, but you can have copies of this if you would like later on, and take a look at my slide deck. So let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen, by just asking you to please consider embedding privacy into the design of all systems. In terms of mobile health apps, it will be absolutely critical, but it will also be an enormous benefit. If you embed it in design and assume positive some posture, you will win in ways that you couldn't have imagined, and you will avoid the unnecessary heartache of privacy infractions and lawsuits and things of that nature. So make it a win-win proposition and start by embedding privacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Whitney, so much for your major contribution to the industry of the privacy by design and some excellent anecdotes of your work. And also, really some of the points here that I really thought to me was the privacy is not a barrier at all to what we're doing. In fact, it's a feature to what we're doing. Privacy is really about the control, and control is about the freedom so that you're in a democratic society. And finally, the positive sum all, I think, is just an excellent moment of resounds with people. So I think Dr. Cookie is willing to take a few questions. If there's any questions in the audience, there's some microphones set up here in both aisles at the front if you want to just spend 3 minutes on questions. Is there anyone that wants to jump up? A couple people making their way out.
Commissioner Hoskins has identified that there are some gaps in the current privacy regulations, and he has promised to address them. Can you speak to what those gaps may be and where those changes may come from?
You may be aware of the fact that there have been a proliferation of data breaches within hospitals and certain healthcare facilities. They've been what we call inside jobs, often by government employees. So there'll be a data breach that is taking place, and the most well-known one is former Mayor Rob Ford's information was accessed improperly by people on the inside of the hospital. And what is very frustrating about that occurrence, which obviously shouldn't happen, is HIPAA, which I'm telling you is the best statute. It is the Personal Health Information Protection Act. It's predicated on what's called a circle of care, which is all about if I go to my GP and he refers me to a specialist, he refers me to a clinic to get an MRI, he refers me to a lab to get another test. All of those, that's considered a circle of care. They're all treating me, and so they don't need to seek positive consent at every instance, which takes up a lot of time and is completely unnecessary. They can assume my implied consent. Beautiful model. This has been followed and mimicked our law. Many provinces, Brunswick, Alberta, Christopher, have picked up on this. 2 years ago, the Institute of Medicine in the United States is looking around the world for a privacy law information privacy statute that they could base their revisions, their proposed revisions on their HIPAA. The only statute they pointed to is Ontario's HIPAA. So that's the backdrop. Great law. What's the problem? The only problem was this. There is a requirement in the HIPAA for mandatory notification of patients if you have a data breach. So you have a data breach, you have to notify the patient. So they had to notify and support of the data breach. What there is not, and this is the only missing piece, there's no obligation for the institution to notify the privacy commission. So absent that, we often heard about data breaches because the hospital would call us directly to notify us, or patients would call us or something. But it was not complete by any means. And what we didn't realize was the massive amount of data breaches that were happening on what seemed a regular basis, that there was no obligation to notify us. That is the amendment that I believe the minister is seeking to introduce, and that he has certainly been approached by a number of us to introduce mandatory breach notification requirement to the commissioner as well as to patients. So it's great to actually notify patients, but you should also notify commissioner and then be in a position to take some action. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the concept of informational self-determination, particularly prevalent in Germany and other jurisdictions. What would it take to make that as ubiquitous and as important as how it is in Germany, in Canadian and Ontario context, particularly for healthcare? Yes, to make that as prevalent as foundational as it is in Germany, it would be to Ontario or Canada, particularly healthcare. What's missing and what we do to get to that point?
And that's a very good question. I think what is missing, and that's why I question whether we'll be able to do it. What is missing is the direct history here in Canada for people to realize what can happen, how easily your freedoms can be stripped, and how closely associated with privacy they are. And I say that not lightly. There's such a strong association. People take freedom for granted. I'm sure most of us who go about our daily activities, we're not thinking about our freedoms, nor should we have to. We enjoy our freedoms. That's the beauty of living in Canada. When you come from a different jurisdiction where you have not, where those who move to Canada have not experienced freedom, it puts everything in a different context. Again, I'll use myself as an example. I'm Armenian. was 4 years old when we came to Canada. My grandmothers who raised me told me many stories. They escaped the genocide. They had their numbers tattooed on the inside of their forearms, the numbers that they had in the camps, in the genocide camps. And they had amazing stories of how they escaped. So freedom to my grandparents and in turn my parents was absolutely critical. So the notion of explaining informational self-determination, the value of that to them, would have been relatively easy. When I speak to people in Canada, and many people get it, but you really have to dig deep sometimes to explain why informational self-determination is so critical to freedom and how important it is. People sometimes say to me, well, are you against the police, law enforcement? Oh my God, I'm not going to be far from the truth. All privacy laws have wide latitude for law enforcement. Over the years, I've worked with former Chief Blair and the law enforcement community extensively to make it, again, a win-win proposition. My life is ruled by positive sum solutions. But the problem is, with most of the people in the public, that notion of if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, is so strongly embedded that there is a resistance, I think, largely speaking in the public, until you explain it and unpack it in this way, to that notion of informational self-determination. So I don't know if we will be able to replicate that here as they do in Germany. You may be familiar with, there's a bill that the federal government is about to introduce, C-51. It is outrageous in that it will curtail your freedom of speech and in turn your freedom. Resist that. There are ways to improve C-51, and I and many other privacy advocates have written to the government indicating that at the very least we must have independent oversight. It's absolutely critical. Otherwise, the government can do whatever they want and can take you in a direction that is the exact opposite of informational self-determination. And that would be my bigger fear for us right now.
Sure. One more question.
So, in terms of the downside of developing medical products and the risk associated with privacy by design, who really owns the risk? Is it the company that puts the product on the market? Is it the company that developed the product? Is it the 10 different products that are behind the product that actually produce the whole system?
That's a very good question. And I would say that the risk would be shared potentially by all of those parties that you mentioned. It depends on how the contractual arrangement is outlined to begin with. So the person, the app developer is actually operating it and touching the consumers or patients. I would think that would be the first line of risk because they are making the product available to the public is giving them the information, whatever information you're collecting in terms of health data from the app. And if that company just restrictively uses that data to themselves, the risk would end there. I'm guessing that doesn't happen. I'm guessing that is shared at different aspects of it are processed differently. So I would say, let's say you had a lawsuit that was filed because it was a privacy complaint. I would say that the risk would certainly reside primarily with the frontline app developer that is touching the patients, but that you could continue on and that all the unauthorized third parties who are accessing this data in a way that has no consensual obligations associated with it. If I was a lawyer, I would go after everyone. Now, let me put this in a more positive light, because I don't want this to be a negative. Sounds awful. So what I would do, if I'm an app developer or one of the, actually, I spoke at in California at Tim O'Reilly's Web 2.0 last year. And it was like 800 app developers in the world. It was so cool. It wasn't just telepaths, just and I was doing my pitch for privacy by design. And what I found was, it wasn't that they were opposed to that model or opposed to building privacy protective measures. They never thought about it. And why should they? They're building their app with a particular purpose, and that's what they're focusing on. I totally get that. So I said, if I could show you how to add a few really basic measures that would ensure greater privacy and offer you greater protection, would transform it into a win-win proposition. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.